The Sultan of Swat, from troubled Baltimore teen to baseball's most legendary figure. February 6, 1920, Boston. The Red Sox owner Harry Frazee signed the papers that would haunt his franchise for 86 years. For $100,000 and a $300,000 loan, he sold George Herman Ruth to the New York Yankees. Frazee needed money for a Broadway show. What he gave away was the greatest player baseball had ever seen. The Yankees got a 25-year-old pitcher-turned-slugger who had just hit 29 home runs, shattering every existing record. What nobody knew was that they were acquiring a force of nature that would transform not just baseball, but American culture itself. This is the story of how an incorrigible orphan from Baltimore's waterfront became the most famous athlete in the world, how his appetites were as legendary as his home runs, and how the numbers he posted remain almost incomprehensible a century later. The Baltimore years, a troubled beginning. George Herman Ruth Jr. was born February 6, 1895, in a cramped apartment above his father's saloon on Emory Street in Baltimore. His parents, George Sr. and Kate, ran a rough establishment in a rougher neighborhood. The waterfront district where Ruth grew up was a place of sailors, longshoremen, and dock workers. Violence was common. Poverty was universal. By age 7, young George was spending more time in the streets than in school, chewing tobacco, drinking beer, and stealing whatever wasn't nailed down. His mother, weakened by bearing 8 children, most of whom died in infancy, had little energy to control her wild son. His father, busy running the saloon from dawn until late into the night, simply couldn't manage the boy. "I was a bad kid," Ruth later admitted without shame. "I say that without pride, but with a feeling that it is better to be truthful. I was listed as incorrigible." Young George ran with street gangs. He fought constantly. He skipped school for weeks at a time. He stole from vendors and picked pockets. His parents tried punishment, reasoning, and pleading. Nothing worked. The boy was heading toward prison or worse. On June 13, 1902, his parents made a decision that would change baseball history. They committed their 7-year-old son to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, a reformatory and orphanage run by the Xaverian brothers. Ruth would spend the next 12 years there, with occasional brief returns home that always ended the same way, back to St. Mary's. The facility housed about 800 boys, most of them orphans or incorrigibles like Ruth. The brothers taught trades: shoemaking, tailoring, carpentry. They enforced strict discipline. They expected hard work. And they offered something Ruth had never experienced: structure, consistency, and genuine care. But at St. Mary's, something extraordinary happened. Brother Matthias Boutlier, a massive man who stood 6 feet 6 inches tall, took an interest in the troubled boy. Matthias taught Ruth baseball, spending hours hitting fungos that the young player would chase down. More importantly, he became the father figure Ruth never had. "Brother Matthias was the greatest man I've ever known," Ruth said decades later. "He taught me to read and write, and he taught me the difference between right and wrong." Brother Matthias could hit a baseball farther than anyone young George had ever seen. He would stand at home plate and launch towering drives that seemed to hang in the air forever. Young Ruth would chase them down, run them back, and beg Matthias to hit another, and another, and another, for hours. By age 15, Ruth was the best player at St. Mary's, excelling at every position but particularly as a left-handed pitcher. His fastball was legendary among Baltimore's amateur leagues. He threw with an easy, fluid motion that generated tremendous velocity. His curveball dropped off the table, and he was fearless, throwing inside without hesitation. In 1914, Jack Dunn, owner of the Baltimore Orioles of the International League, came to St. Mary's to watch the 19-year-old phenom. Brother Matthias had told Dunn about his prize student. Dunn watched Ruth pitch 1 inning. He signed him to his first professional contract on February 14, 1914, for $600. When Ruth showed up for spring training in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the older players immediately noticed the skinny kid who never left Dunn's side. "Here comes Dunn with his new babe," one player remarked. The nickname stuck. George Herman Ruth became Babe Ruth. The Boston years, from pitcher to slugger. Ruth's professional career lasted exactly 5 months in Baltimore. The Orioles were struggling financially, competing with the upstart Federal League for fans and players. By July, Dunn was desperate. He sold his best players to major league teams. Ruth went to the Boston Red Sox for $2,900. On July 11, 1914, Babe Ruth pitched his first major league game. He got the win. What followed was one of the most dominant pitching careers in baseball history. From 1915 to 1919, Ruth established himself as the best left-handed pitcher in the American League. In 1916, he went 23-12 with a 1.75 earned run average. He led the league in shutouts with 9. His fastball was overpowering, his curveball devastating. In 1917, he went 24-13. His earned run average was 2.01. He pitched 41 complete games. In the World Series that year, Ruth pitched 14 consecutive scoreless innings, a record that would stand for decades. But something else was happening. When Ruth wasn't pitching, Red Sox manager Ed Barrows started putting him in the outfield or at first base, because when Ruth came to bat, extraordinary things happened. He didn't just hit the ball, he demolished it. The baseball of that era was dead. Literally, the ball was softer, heavier, and less tightly wound than modern baseballs. Teams used the same ball for entire games. By the ninth inning, it was often brown, misshapen, and soft as a beanbag. Spitballs were legal. Pitchers scuffed balls, applied tobacco juice, and threw pitches that danced unpredictably. Home runs were rare. The entire American League hit only 96 home runs in 1918. Ruth hit 11 of them while pitching in 20 games. His home runs were different from the occasional drive that cleared the fence. Ruth's home runs soared. They traveled distances that seemed impossible given the dead ball and the conditions of play. In 1919, Ruth convinced Barrow to let him play the outfield more often. He pitched just 17 games, but appeared in 111 games as a position player. The results were shocking. He hit 29 home runs, more than any player had ever hit in a single season. The previous record was 27, set in 1884 by Ned Williamson under unusual circumstances. 29 home runs represented more than the total hit by any other entire team in the American League. Baseball had never seen anything like it. Sports writers struggled to describe what Ruth was doing. He wasn't just hitting home runs. He was redefining what was possible. But Ruth was also becoming difficult. In 1914, at age 19, he had married Helen Woodford, a 16-year-old waitress from Boston. The marriage was troubled from the start. Ruth's appetites extended beyond baseball. He drank heavily, caroused with teammates until dawn, and showed little interest in domestic life. Helen wanted a quiet home. Ruth wanted excitement. By 1919, Ruth was demanding $20,000 per year, an astronomical sum. He was also becoming difficult to manage, carousing until dawn, showing up late, ignoring team rules. Red Sox owner Harry Frazee wanted him gone. The sale that changed everything. Then came the sale to New York. Frazee claimed he needed money to finance Broadway shows. The truth was more complicated. Ruth was demanding $20,000 per year, an astronomical sum. He was also becoming impossible to control. He defied managers, ignored curfews, and openly mocked team discipline. Frazee wanted him gone. Yankees owners Jacob Ruppert and Tillinghast Huston paid $125,000, not $100,000 as commonly reported, the highest price ever paid for a player. They also loaned Frazee $300,000 using Fenway Park as collateral. It was an astonishing deal. Ruppert would later say it was the best money he ever spent. The reaction in Boston was immediate and furious. Fans were outraged. Sports writers condemned Frazee as a traitor. The Boston faithful sensed they had lost something irreplaceable. They were right. The Red Sox wouldn't win another World Series for 86 years. The curse of the Bambino had begun. The New York years, building a legend. Ruth arrived in New York in 1920 and immediately became the most famous athlete in America. That first season, he hit 54 home runs, 54. The next highest total in baseball was 19. He hit more home runs than 14 of the 15 other major league teams combined. The baseball world was stunned. Nobody had imagined such power was possible. Sports writer Grantland Rice wrote, "Ruth has changed the game completely. He has shown us a new way to play baseball." But the numbers were only part of the story. The way Ruth hit home runs was unprecedented. He swung from his heels with such violence that he often spun himself completely around on misses. When he connected, the ball traveled distances previously considered impossible. His home runs didn't just clear fences, they soared over buildings. At the Polo Grounds, where the Yankees played from 1920 to 1922, Ruth's home runs landed in the upper deck of the right field stands, over 500 feet from home plate. Witnesses claimed some of his drives would have traveled 600 feet if unobstructed. Fans would arrive hours early just to watch Ruth take batting practice. In 1921, Ruth hit 59 home runs. His slugging percentage was .846, meaning he averaged nearly a base per at-bat beyond just reaching first. No player in history had slugged over 700 before Ruth. He would do it 12 times. New York embraced Ruth completely. He was perfect for the city, brash, confident, excessive. He wore expensive suits and drove fast cars. He ate enormous meals at the finest restaurants. He was recognized everywhere he went. Children followed him in the streets. Women swooned. Men wanted to be him. The house that Ruth built. The Yankees moved into their new stadium in 1923, a massive structure in the Bronx built specifically to showcase Ruth. They called it the house that Ruth built. The stadium held over 60,000 fans, more than any ballpark in baseball. The right field fence was just 295 feet from home plate, perfect for Ruth's powerful left-handed swing. He christened it with a home run in the opening game. That year, he hit 41 home runs and led the Yankees to their first World Series championship. After years of heartbreak and near misses, Ruth finally had his championship ring. The 1923 World Series showcased Ruth at his peak. In 6 games against the New York Giants, he hit 3 home runs, batted .368, and put on a defensive clinic in right field. He threw out runners with powerful, accurate throws from deep in the outfield. He made spectacular catches. He was everywhere. But Ruth's personal life remained chaos. His marriage to Helen had collapsed completely. They lived separate lives. Helen refused to divorce him on religious grounds, but they rarely saw each other. Ruth's infidelities were constant and flagrant. He kept apartments in New York for his various girlfriends. His drinking was legendary. Stories about Ruth's appetites became part of his legend. He would consume a dozen hot dogs before a game, wash them down with a case of beer, and still hit 3 home runs. He would stay out until dawn, show up at the ballpark barely able to stand, and launch towering home runs. His teammates marveled at his constitution. "I swing big with everything I've got," Ruth explained his philosophy. "I hit big or I miss big. I like to live as big as I can." Manager Miller Huggins tried repeatedly to control Ruth. He imposed curfews that Ruth ignored. He assigned coaches to follow Ruth at night. Ruth evaded them. He fined Ruth repeatedly. Ruth paid the fines and continued his lifestyle. The conflict came to a head in 1925. The bellyache heard round the world. At spring training, Ruth's lifestyle finally caught up with him. He had spent the off-season eating, drinking, and carousing with even more abandon than usual. By spring training, he was massively overweight and clearly out of shape. On April 7, 1925, he collapsed at a train station in Asheville, North Carolina. Press reports called it the bellyache heard round the world. The truth was more serious. Ruth had an intestinal abscess that required surgery. Doctors cut a hole in his abdomen to drain the infection. He nearly died. He missed the first 6 weeks of the season. When he returned, he was overweight and out of shape. He hit just 25 home runs, his lowest total since becoming a full-time position player. The Yankees finished in 7th place, their worst showing in years. Manager Miller Huggins, fed up with Ruth's insubordination, fined him $5,000, an enormous sum, and suspended him indefinitely. Ruth was furious. He threatened to have Huggins fired. Yankees owner Jacob Ruppert backed his manager. Ruth found himself facing a choice: submit to team discipline or end his career. He chose submission. For the first time in his adult life, Ruth accepted authority. The 1926 season saw Ruth return to form with 47 home runs. The Yankees won the pennant and faced the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series, but the series ended in humiliation for Ruth. In the ninth inning of Game 7, with the Yankees trailing by 1 run, Ruth was thrown out trying to steal second base. The Cardinals won the championship. Ruth was devastated. 60, the season that defined greatness. His redemption came in 1927 with what many consider the greatest season in baseball history. The 1927 Yankees were a juggernaut. They won 110 games. They featured Murderers Row, a lineup so fearsome that opponents were psychologically defeated before games began. Ruth hit 60 home runs. The record would stand for 34 years. His slugging percentage that year was .772. He walked 137 times because pitchers were terrified to throw to him. His on-base percentage was .486. He scored 158 runs and drove in 164. The home run chase captivated America. As September arrived and Ruth approached his own record of 59, newspapers provided daily updates. Fans packed stadiums hoping to witness history. On September 30th, 1927, at Yankee Stadium, Ruth hit his 60th home run off Washington's Tom Zachary. The ball sailed into the right field stands. The crowd erupted. Ruth circled the bases with his distinctive mincing trot, smiling broadly. When he touched home plate, his teammates mobbed him. Baseball had a new record, and it seemed untouchable. The 1927 Yankees swept the World Series in 4 games. They outscored the Pittsburgh Pirates by a combined 23-10. Ruth hit 2 home runs. Lou Gehrig, batting cleanup behind Ruth, hit 373 with 4 home runs. Many historians consider the 1927 Yankees the greatest team ever assembled. Personal tragedy and new beginnings. But personal tragedy followed Ruth's greatest triumph. In January 1929, Helen Ruth died in a house fire in Watertown, Massachusetts. She was 31 years old. The circumstances were suspicious. She was living with another man, a dentist named Edward Kinder. The fire started in the early morning hours. Both Helen and Kinder died. Ruth, who hadn't seen his wife in years, was nonetheless shaken. They had been separated for nearly a decade, but he had never pursued divorce. Now he was a widower. The press treated him sympathetically, glossing over the details of the estrangement. 3 months later, on April 17, 1929, Ruth married Claire Hodgson, an actress and widow he had been seeing for years. Claire had a daughter, Dorothy, from her first marriage. Ruth adopted Dorothy and treated her as his own daughter. Claire brought discipline to Ruth's life that had been missing. She monitored his diet, controlled his schedule, and provided stability. She accompanied him on road trips. She managed his finances. She turned down endorsement deals she considered beneath his dignity. Ruth, at age 34, seemed to finally mature. The statistics from Ruth's peak years defy belief. From 1920 to 1934, he led the American League in home runs 12 times. His career total of 714 home runs stood as baseball's most hallowed record for 39 years. When he retired, he had hit 40% more home runs than any other player in history. His slugging percentage of .690 remains the highest in baseball history. His on-base percentage of .474 is second only to Ted Williams. He walked 2,062 times because pitchers couldn't afford to let him hit. When they did pitch to him, he hit a home run once every 11.76 at-bats, a rate unmatched until the steroid era. Saving baseball, the cultural impact. But the numbers don't capture Ruth's impact. He saved baseball. In 1919, the Black Sox scandal revealed that 8 Chicago White Sox players had conspired with gamblers to fix the 1919 World Series. The sport's integrity was shattered. Faith in baseball collapsed. Fans stayed away from ballparks. The game seemed doomed. Ruth's home runs restored that faith. Fans packed stadiums to watch him hit balls farther than anyone imagined possible. He made baseball exciting again. He transformed it from a game of bunts and stolen bases into a game of power and drama. His personality, his charisma, and his superhuman feats gave baseball a new identity. He was also the first true American sports celebrity. His face appeared in movies, advertisements, and newsreels. Children across America imitated his distinctive stance at the plate, feet close together, bat held high, weight shifting forward as the pitch approached. His salary reached $80,000 in 1930 and 1931, making him the highest-paid player in baseball history to that point. When told he made more money than President Herbert Hoover, Ruth famously replied, "I had a better year than he did." The quote captured Ruth's confidence and charisma perfectly. The cold shot. The 1932 World Series produced Ruth's most legendary moment. In Game 3 at Wrigley Field in Chicago, with the score tied in the fifth inning, Ruth faced Cubs pitcher Charlie Root. The Cubs bench was riding him mercilessly, shouting insults and throwing lemons onto the field. Ruth had already hit one home run earlier in the game. Now, with the count at 2 balls and 2 strikes, Ruth stepped out of the batter's box. He pointed towards center field. Some witnesses said he pointed at Root. Others said he pointed at the Cubs' dugout. Most said he pointed at the center field bleachers. On the next pitch, he hit a home run to almost exactly that spot. The ball landed deep in the center field bleachers. Ruth circled the bases laughing, gesturing toward the Cubs' bench. The called shot became baseball's most debated moment. Did he really call it? Witnesses disagreed. Root insisted Ruth never pointed. Cubs catcher Gabby Hartnett said he did. Film footage is inconclusive. Ruth himself gave conflicting accounts over the years. Sometimes he confirmed it, sometimes he demurred. But the truth doesn't matter. The legend does. And the legend says Babe Ruth pointed to the bleachers and then put the ball exactly where he said he would. That's who Babe Ruth was, a man who transcended reality. The sad ending. By 1934, Ruth was 39 years old and clearly declining. His reflexes had slowed. His massive body, never properly conditioned, was breaking down. He hit just 22 home runs. The Yankees, recognizing the end, didn't offer him a contract for 1935. Ruth wanted to manage. He believed he deserved a chance to lead a team, but Yankees owner Jacob Ruppert refused. He doubted Ruth could control himself, much less 25 other players. Ruth was devastated. He accepted a position with the Boston Braves as assistant manager and player. It was a disaster. The title was meaningless. He had no real authority. The Braves were terrible, and Ruth's role as assistant manager was purely ceremonial. He was there to sell tickets. But on May 25, 1935, at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, Ruth gave baseball one final gift. In his last great game, he hit 3 home runs. The final one, his 714th, cleared the right field grandstand, the first ball ever hit completely out of Forbes Field. It traveled over 600 feet. 5 days later, Ruth played his final game. He went 0 for 1, striking out. He retired with a slash line of 342, 474, 690. Those numbers remain among the greatest in baseball history. Retirement was difficult. Ruth wanted desperately to manage in the major leagues, but no team would hire him. They feared he couldn't control himself, so how could he control a team? He made appearances, played exhibition games, and tried business ventures that mostly failed. He coached briefly for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1938. The Yankees brought him back in 1946 as a coach, but it was charity, not respect. Ruth knew it. The game had moved on without him. The final days. In 1946, Ruth noticed a persistent pain over his left eye. Doctors discovered a malignant tumor in his nasopharynx. Cancer. They operated, then administered experimental chemotherapy. The treatment ravaged him. The robust, barrel-chested giant withered to less than 140 pounds. On June 13, 1948, Yankee Stadium held Babe Ruth Day. Ruth, dying from cancer, walked slowly to home plate, using a bat as a cane. His voice hoarse from the disease, he addressed the crowd of nearly 50,000. "You know how bad my voice sounds," he rasped. "Well, it feels just as bad." The crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Many were openly crying. Everyone knew they were saying goodbye. 2 months later, on August 16, 1948, George Herman Ruth died at age 53. Over 100,000 people filed past his casket at Yankee Stadium over 2 days. His funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral drew thousands more. He was buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York. The legend lives on. Babe Ruth's legacy transcends statistics. Though his statistics remain staggering, he didn't just play baseball, he transformed it. Before Ruth, home runs were accidents. After Ruth, they were the point of the game. Every power hitter since owes a debt to the kid from Baltimore who swung for the fences every time. But more than that, he proved that Americans loved larger-than-life heroes who played hard, lived hard, and never apologized. He was Paul Bunyan in pinstripes, a mythological figure who happened to be real. His appetites were excessive, his talent was excessive, his fame was excessive. Everything about Babe Ruth was excessive. And that's exactly what made him perfect. At the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, a plaque commemorates Ruth as the greatest drawing card in the history of baseball. But even that undersells him. He wasn't just baseball's greatest draw. He was America's first modern sports superstar, the template for every athlete celebrity who followed. German Luftwaffe pilots feared the sound of 50-caliber machine guns. Baseball pitchers feared the sound of Babe Ruth's bat meeting the ball. Both sounds announced that something unprecedented was about to happen. The boy from St. Mary's, who couldn't stay out of trouble, became the man who saved baseball. The incorrigible Orphan became the most beloved figure in American sports. The pitcher who became a slugger became a legend. 714 home runs, 2,873 hits, a .690 slugging percentage. Those are the numbers. But the real story is simpler. A kid learned to hit a baseball farther than anyone thought possible, and in doing so, he became immortal. That's Babe Ruth, that's the Sultan of Swat, that's the Bambino, that's the Colossus of Clout. That's the man who pointed to the bleachers and then sent the ball exactly where he said it would go. Because that's what legends do.